Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. Emma stood outside her own front door, keys dangling uselessly from her fingers. The lock had been changed on her birthday. Rain trickled down her neck as she pressed her forehead against the familiar red door, now suddenly foreign and unwelcoming. 3 years of marriage, and Mason had never done anything like this before. She tried calling him again, the 6th attempt in 20 minutes. Straight to voicemail, the same with his work number. His cryptic text from earlier repeated in her mind, "Come home at exactly 7 tonight, not a minute sooner." It was 6:15 now. The spring rain intensified, soaking through her light jacket. She had rushed home early from work, excited about whatever surprise Mason had planned for her 35th birthday. Instead, she found herself locked out of her own house with groceries growing soggy at her feet. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the darkening street. Their neighbor Lily peered out her window, clearly wondering why Emma was standing in the downpour instead of going inside. Emma waved awkwardly, pretending everything was fine. The last thing she wanted was to make a scene. Perhaps this was part of some elaborate surprise. Mason had always been thoughtful about celebrations, but never mysterious or secretive. The past few months had been strained between them, arguments about work-life balance, about starting a family, about the direction their lives were taking. Small disagreements had grown into silent dinners and separate weekend plans. Emma retreated to her car, cranking the heat to combat the chill setting into her bones. Her phone buzzed with birthday wishes from friends and co-workers, but all she could focus on was Mason's strange behavior. She scrolled through their recent text exchanges, searching for clues. 2 weeks ago, she'd discovered a receipt for an expensive restaurant she'd never heard of. When questioned, Mason claimed it was a business lunch. 4 days ago, he'd received a phone call that made him step outside to talk in private. Yesterday, he'd come home smelling faintly of perfume, not hers. Her stomach tightened as unwelcome thoughts flooded her mind. Was this some cruel birthday gesture? Had their marriage deteriorated so completely that he would lock her out, force her to wait in the rain while he— what? Packed his things? Prepared divorce papers? Emma closed her eyes, remembering how they'd met at a mutual friend's wedding. How he'd spilled champagne on her dress and spent the entire reception making it up to her. How they'd talked until sunrise. How certain she had been that she'd found her person. The rain drummed against the car roof as tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away angrily. This wasn't how her birthday was supposed to go. This wasn't who they were supposed to become. At 6:45, she noticed movement in the upstairs window. A shadow passed by their bedroom curtains. Mason was definitely home. Emma's hands gripped the steering wheel as anger replaced confusion. How dare he lock her out? What kind of game was this? As the clock on her dashboard changed to 6:57, Emma stepped back into the rain, determination straightening her spine. She wouldn't wait any longer. Birthday surprise or relationship crisis, she deserved answers. She marched toward the house, ready to pound on the door until her knuckles bruised if necessary. But just as she reached the front steps, the porch light flickered on. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Mason stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Emma couldn't tell if the moisture on his face was sweat or tears. His usually crisp button-down was wrinkled, sleeves rolled unevenly to his elbows. Behind him, the house was eerily dark. "You're early," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's pouring rain, Mason. I've been sitting in my car for almost an hour." Emma pushed past him into the foyer, droplets of water trailing behind her. "What's going on? Why did you change the locks?" Mason shut the door quietly, taking a deep breath. "I needed time. I needed to make sure everything was ready." "Ready for what?" Her voice cracked. "Are you leaving me? Is that what this birthday surprise is?" His eyes widened. "Leaving you? Emma, no. God, no." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Then explain why I'm standing in our hallway soaking wet on my birthday, locked out of my own house while you've been ignoring my calls. Mason ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit she'd once found endearing. Now it just irritated her. I know how this looks. I needed everything to be perfect. And it wasn't ready when you texted that you were coming home early. He guided her toward the kitchen, which was equally dark. The familiar layout of their home felt suddenly sinister in the shadows. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Something was definitely wrong. Mason was never this serious, this tense. Close your eyes, he whispered as they reached the kitchen doorway. Mason, I'm not in the mood for… Please, just trust me one more time. Trust. Such a simple word that had become so complicated between them. Emma hesitated, then closed her eyes, feeling vulnerable and foolish. She heard Mason fumbling with something, footsteps moving around her, a strange rustling sound. Okay, open them. The kitchen was transformed. Dozens of candles illuminated the space, casting a warm glow across their farmhouse table now covered with a linen cloth she didn't recognize. A bottle of champagne sat in an ice bucket. Their wedding china, never used since the day they'd unpacked. It was arranged perfectly for two. But what caught her breath wasn't the romantic setting. It was the stack of papers in the center of the table, legal papers. Emma's body went cold despite her wet clothes. What is this? She whispered. Mason pulled out her chair. Sit, please. She obeyed mechanically, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Divorce papers wouldn't require candles and champagne, would they? Was he in some kind of trouble? Financial problems he'd been hiding? I've been working on this for months, Mason said, sliding into the chair opposite her. I wanted to have everything finalized before telling you. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the top document. It was a deed. She skimmed the legal jargon, her eyes catching on an address she didn't recognize, and both their names listed as owners. I don't understand. Mason leaned forward, his eyes shining with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. It's the cottage. The one on Lake Monroe. The one you fell in love with last summer when we drove up for Jen's wedding. Emma blinked, memories flooding back. The white cottage with blue shutters, the wraparound porch, the way the evening sun had glinted off the lake water. She'd stood on that porch and whispered, I could live here forever. You bought it? Her voice was barely audible. We bought it, he corrected. Or we will, once you sign. The owners accepted our offer last month. Emma stared at the paperwork, struggling to reconcile this moment with the narrative she'd been building in her car. But the lock? The secrecy? Why shut me out like that? Mason's shoulders slumped slightly. The cottage wasn't the only surprise. I've been renovating our house too. The bedroom, the bathroom. I wanted to update everything you've been talking about changing for years. He gestured vaguely upstairs. I needed these last few hours to finish, but when you texted you were coming home early. So you changed our locks. Emma's relief was quickly being replaced by indignation. I panicked. Mason's voice was small. The contractors just left. There was dust everywhere. Nothing was how I planned it. Emma tried to process this information. The expensive restaurant receipt, probably meeting with real estate agents, the private phone calls, contractors and property managers. But the perfume, whose perfume was on your shirt yesterday? Mason looked genuinely confused. Perfume? Oh. Understanding dawned on his face. That must have been Linda, the interior designer. She helped pick out everything for the cottage and the renovation here. She hugged me when we finalized the plans. Emma wanted to believe him, desperately. But something still didn't add up. Why now, Mason? We've barely spoken in weeks. We've been like strangers living together. He was quiet for a long moment, candlelight flickering across his features. "Because I was losing you," he finally said. "Because I could feel you slipping away, and I didn't know how to fix it with words." Emma felt her chest tighten. "So instead of talking to me, you secretly bought property and renovated our house?" "I know it sounds crazy." Mason rubbed his temples. "But every time we tried to talk, it turned into another argument about the future, about children, about careers, about whether this house would ever feel like more than a temporary stop." His words hit uncomfortably close to home. Emma had been restless, feeling trapped in a life that had once seemed so promising but now felt stagnant. They'd stopped dreaming together, stopped planning. Separate lives under one roof. "The cottage is our fresh start," Mason continued. "A place that's just ours, that we chose together, even if you didn't know we were choosing it. And the renovations here, they're to show you I'm committed to making our everyday life better, not just our vacations." Emma ran her fingers along the deed's edge. "You did all this without knowing if I'd even want it anymore? Without knowing if I'd still want us?" Mason's gaze dropped to the table. "I had to try something. Words weren't working." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "Come upstairs? See the rest?" Part of her wanted to refuse, to hold on to her anger about being locked out, about the secrets. But curiosity and something deeper, something like hope, propelled her to stand and follow him up the familiar staircase. At their bedroom door, Mason paused. "It's not quite finished. The paint in the bathroom is still drying, and the new curtains haven't arrived yet, but—" He pushed the door open, and Emma felt her breath catch. Their formerly beige bedroom was now painted the exact shade of blue-gray she'd admired in a magazine months ago. The bulky furniture they'd inherited from Mason's parents was gone, replaced with the mid-century pieces she'd always loved. A reading nook had been built into the window alcove, something she'd mentioned wanting since they first viewed the house. On her nightstand sat a framed photo she'd never seen before, the two of them on the dock at Lake Monroe, looking out at the sunset. She hadn't even known someone had captured that moment. "How did you remember all this?" Emma whispered, running her hand along the new bedspread, the exact pattern she'd pointed out in a store last year, and then talked herself out of buying because it was too expensive. Mason stood in the doorway, uncertainty written across his face. "I listen, Emma, even when it seems like I don't." Emma wandered through the transformed space, fingers tracing new textures, eyes absorbing details that represented years of casual comments she'd made and forgotten. The bathroom door was ajar, revealing glimpses of marble and brushed nickel, the exact finishes she'd saved in design apps she thought no one else ever looked at. "There's more," Mason said quietly, guiding her back downstairs, past the kitchen to the small room off the living area that had functioned as a catch-all storage space since they moved in. He hesitated before opening the door. This part was the biggest gamble. Emma steeled herself, uncertain what further surprises could possibly await. When Mason pushed the door open, soft lamplight spilled into the hallway. The cluttered space had been transformed into a home office, but not just any office. Two desks faced each other beneath the window. Between them stood a simple bassinet. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, though part of her was beginning to. Mason's voice was tentative. "It's a compromise, a workspace for both of us. For your photography, for my writing, and space for what might come next when we're ready, if we're ever ready." Their most painful arguments had centered around this very topic. Emma's growing photography business demanded time and space. Mason's desire for children had grown more pronounced with each passing year. Neither had been willing to bend. "You'd share your writing space?" Emma asked, knowing how fiercely private Mason was about his work. "And you'd share your studio," he responded. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." Emma sank into one of the desk chairs, overwhelmed, In one evening, Mason had addressed every major source of conflict between them: their living space, their future plans, their need for individual creative outlets, their desire for somewhere to escape together. "Why didn't you just talk to me about all this?" she asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind. "We stopped hearing each other," Mason said simply. "We'd say the same words, have the same fights, reach the same impasse. I thought maybe actions would speak louder." Emma closed her eyes, remembering the cruel thoughts she'd entertained while sitting in her car. How quickly she'd jumped to the worst conclusions, how readily she'd believed their marriage was ending rather than being reinvented. "I have one more thing to show you," Mason said, extending his hand. He led her to the backyard, where their neglected patio had been transformed with string lights, potted plants, and a small fire pit. In the center stood an easel with a canvas covered by a cloth. "Your outdoor studio," Mason explained, "for when the light is better out here than inside." With trembling fingers, Emma removed the cloth from the canvas. It wasn't blank as she expected, but contained a single line in Mason's distinctive handwriting. "The story of us, to be continued." Tears filled her eyes as the magnitude of his gesture settled over her. This wasn't just about renovations or property. This was Mason's way of saying he still believed in their story when she'd begun to lose faith. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything yet." Mason stood beside her, not quite touching. "I know I went about this all wrong. The locked door, the secrets. I just wanted one perfect moment to show you what I couldn't tell you, that I'm still fighting for us, even when it seems like I've given up." Emma turned to face him fully. The man before her was both familiar and strange. The husband she'd begun to believe didn't see her anymore, suddenly revealing he'd been seeing everything all along. "When did we stop talking to each other?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know," Mason admitted. "But I'd like to start again." They sat by the newly installed fire pit, flames casting flickering shadows across the yard as night deepened around them. The rain had stopped, leaving behind that peculiar freshness that follows a spring storm. Emma wrapped her hands around a mug of tea Mason had prepared. Honey and lemon, exactly how she liked it when she was upset. "Tell me about the cottage," she said finally, breaking a silence that had stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken thoughts. Mason leaned forward, elbows on knees, fire reflecting in his eyes. "It needs work. The kitchen is straight out of the 70s. The dock needs repairs." A small smile played at his lips. "But the bones are good. And the view? Emma, the view is exactly as you remember it. And you did this without knowing if I'd even want it?" The question had been circling in her mind all evening. "I did it because whether or not we stayed together, I wanted you to have something you loved." Mason's voice was soft but certain. "If things between us, if they couldn't be fixed, the cottage would be yours. A parting gift, I guess." Emma felt her throat tighten. "You were preparing for us to end?" "I was preparing for every possibility," he corrected. "Hoping for the best, but—" He trailed off, poking at the fire with a stick. The crackling flames filled their silence. Emma tried to remember when they'd last sat together like this, simply being present with each other without distractions or obligations. Months, perhaps. Maybe longer. "I've been offered a position with National Geographic," she said abruptly. The job offer had come 3 weeks ago, and she'd told no one, not even her closest friends. Certainly not Mason, who she'd assumed would see it as yet another obstacle to their starting a family. Mason's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "Emma, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it would mean travel, more time away, more reasons to delay having children." She stared into her tea. "More reasons for us to grow apart. Is that what you want? The position?" "Emma." nodded slowly. It's what I've worked toward for years, but I was afraid to even mention it because I thought— You thought I'd make you choose, Mason finished for her, between your career and our family. Wouldn't you have? Mason was quiet. For a moment. 3 months ago? Probably. But now— He gestured toward the house behind them. That office with 2 desks and a bassinet? That wasn't just symbolic, Emma. It was me trying to show you that I understand we need both. Your work, my work, and maybe someday a family, not one at the expense of the others. Emma studied his face in the firelight, searching for any sign of insincerity or manipulation. She found none, only openness and a vulnerability that had been absent from their interactions for too long. I resigned from the firm last week, Mason said suddenly. Emma nearly dropped her mug. You what? Mason, your partnership was killing me, he finished. 80-hour weeks defending corporations I despise. Coming home too exhausted to write, too drained to be present with you. He shook his head. I've taken a position with the environmental law clinic at the university, half the salary but regular hours. Time to finish my novel. Time to be a partner to you, not just a roommate. Why didn't you tell me this before tonight? Because I wanted to show you everything at once, the whole picture of what our life could be, not what it has been. Emma set her mug down on the patio stones. We've been making all these life-changing decisions without talking to each other. We have, Mason agreed. But maybe that ends tonight. Emma looked up at their house, their home, seeing it with new eyes. The windows glowed warmly against the night sky. Inside were physical manifestations of dreams they'd shared and then stopped believing were possible together. I don't know if all these changes fix what's broken between us, she admitted. Beautiful spaces don't heal broken communication. No, Mason agreed, but they give us somewhere to start the conversations we need to have. Dawn found them still talking, having moved from the backyard to the kitchen when the night air grew too cold. Empty mugs and half-eaten birthday cake sat between them at the table. Emma couldn't remember the last time they'd stayed up all night, together, peeling back layers of misunderstandings and missed connections. I need to ask you something, Emma said as morning light began filtering through the windows. And I need the absolute truth. Mason nodded, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. Anything. Did you ever consider leaving? During these past months when we barely looked at each other? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze dropping to his hands on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Yes. Once. Emma had expected the answer but still felt it like a physical blow. When? 2 months ago. After. That fight about the holiday party. Mason swallowed visibly. You said something about how we'd become strangers who remembered loving each other once, and I thought maybe that was all we had left. Memories. Emma remembered the argument. She'd been exhausted from a weekend wedding shoot, dreading a corporate function where she'd have to make small talk with Mason's colleagues. Words had been exchanged that should never have been said. What changed your mind? Mason's expression softened. The next morning, you left for your studio before I woke up, but you'd made coffee and left it in a thermos by my keys, with a note that just said peace offering? He shook his head slightly. It was such a small thing, but it reminded me that underneath all our problems there was still care, still thoughtfulness. A thermos of coffee stopped you from leaving our marriage? Emma couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Not just the coffee, what it represented. Mason reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers tentatively. That even when you were angry, even when we were broken, you still wanted peace between us. It gave me hope that maybe we were worth fighting for. Emma felt tears threatening. Again. She was beyond exhausted, emotions raw from hours of honest conversation. I almost texted someone else that night, she admitted. An old colleague who'd made it clear he was interested if my situation ever changed. Mason's hand stilled against hers, but he didn't pull away. Did you? No. I deleted his number instead. Emma met Mason's gaze directly. Because despite everything, I couldn't imagine my life without you in it. Even a broken us felt better than no us at all. Silence settled between them. Not the tense silence of recent months, but something gentler. Reflective. We've been so close to losing everything, Mason finally said. We still might, Emma replied truthfully. One night of honesty doesn't erase months of disconnection. Mason nodded slowly. I know, but it's a beginning, not an ending. They moved to the living room as morning brightened, both too wired from conversation and revelation to consider sleep despite their exhaustion. Emma curled into the corner of the sofa while Mason made fresh coffee. Tell me about the National Geographic position, he called from the kitchen. Where would you be traveling? Southeast Asia, primarily. 4 major assignments over 2 years. Emma watched him return with steaming mugs. The first trip would be 6 weeks, starting next month. Mason settled beside her, close but not touching. That soon? Too soon? He considered this, taking a sip of coffee before answering. It would be hard, but we could make it work. Weekend visits when possible, daily calls. And the cottage? The renovations? All your plans? They'll be here when you get back. Mason set his mug down, turning to face her fully. Emma, I didn't do all this to trap you here. I did it to give us both a home worth returning to. Emma felt something inside her chest unclench, a tightness she hadn't even realized she was carrying. I thought wanting my career meant not wanting our life together. I've been pulling away because I was afraid you'd make me choose. And I was trying to build a life so compelling you wouldn't want to choose anything else, Mason admitted. We were both wrong. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows now, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Emma looked around. Their living room, unchanged in the renovation, but somehow different in the light of their new understanding. What happens now? She asked quietly. The cottage keys felt weighty in Emma's palm as she stood on the weathered dock, lake water lapping gently against the wooden pilings. 2 weeks had passed since her birthday. 2 weeks of careful conversations, tentative reconnections, and small steps toward rebuilding what had nearly been lost. Mason stood a few feet away, giving her space to absorb the reality of what they'd purchased. The white cottage with blue shutters was more weathered than she remembered from their brief visit last summer, paint peeling in places, garden overgrown. But the setting was exactly as magical as she recalled, pine trees framing the water view, mountains rising blue in the distance. What do you think? Mason asked, breaking the reverent silence between them. Now that you're seeing it in person again? Emma turned in a slow circle, taking in the private stretch of shoreline, the small boathouse, the wraparound porch she'd once dreamed about. It needs work, she said honestly. Maybe more than we realized. Mason nodded, unsurprised by her assessment. The inspection report mentioned the roof will need replacing within 5 years, and the septic system is ancient. But the bones are good, Emma echoed his words from her birthday night. And the view is perfect. They walked back to the cottage together, pointing out projects and possibilities. The kitchen truly was a relic from decades past. Avocado green, appliances and laminate countertops that had seen better days. The living room featured a massive stone fireplace that dominated the space. Upstairs, 3 small bedrooms tucked under sloped ceilings offered stunning lake views through dormered windows. We could take down this wall, Emma suggested, gesturing, between the kitchen and dining area. Open up the space, bring more light in. Mason jotted notes on his phone. The master bathroom needs a complete overhaul, and that back bedroom would make a perfect darkroom for you. They continued this way for hours, cataloging necessary repairs and dreaming of improvements. It felt like the early days of their relationship, collaborative, energized, full of shared vision. Emma caught herself smiling more than she had in months. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the property, they settled on the dock with the picnic dinner they'd packed. Lake water sparkled with golden light as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. 6 days until your flight, Mason said, pouring wine into plastic cups. Emma nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety and excitement that had accompanied this career opportunity from the beginning. The equipment arrived yesterday. I still need to test everything before packing. I updated the calendar with your itinerary, Mason replied. I thought maybe we could try a regular call schedule, allowing for time differences, of course. This was new territory for them, planning for separation rather than drifting apart while physically together. Emma took a sip of wine, considering. 7 o'clock your time, 7 o'clock my time? That gives us 2 chances to connect each day depending on where I am and what I'm shooting. Mason looked pleased with the suggestion. And we could keep a shared document for cottage renovation plans, so you can still be part of the decisions even from halfway around the world? I'd like that, Emma said, surprised to find she truly meant it. 2 weeks ago, such domestic planning would have felt like chains tethering her to a life she was eager to escape. Now, it felt like threads connecting her to something solid, something worth returning to. They ate in comfortable silence as the sun set, casting brilliant oranges and pinks across the water. Emma found herself taking mental photographs, cataloging details she wanted to remember during the weeks ahead. The specific blue of the lake at twilight, the gentle cadence of Mason's breathing beside her, the feeling of possibility that permeated this place. I'm scared, she admitted as darkness settled around them. Not of traveling or the assignments. I've done that before. I'm scared of us losing this momentum, this reconnection. I'm scared of coming back to find we're strangers again. Mason was quiet for a long moment. I can't promise that won't happen, he finally said. Long distance is hard, even when you start from a solid foundation, and we're still rebuilding. His honesty was both painful and refreshing. No grand declarations or empty reassurances, just acknowledgement of the work still ahead. But I can promise this, he continued, turning to face her in the gathering darkness. I won't stop trying, even when it's difficult, even when it would be easier to retreat into silence. Emma reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I promise, too. No more assumptions about what you're thinking. No more making decisions alone that affect us both. Across the lake, lights from other cottages twinkled like earthbound stars. Emma leaned her head against Mason's shoulder, allowing herself to believe, for the first time in too long, that they might actually find their way back to each other. 6 months later, Emma's key turned in the front door lock of their home. Exhaustion weighed her limbs as she dragged her equipment cases inside. The familiar scent of their house, now tinged with fresh paint and wood polish, enveloping her like an embrace. Mason, she called, surprised by the darkness. He had known her arrival time. They'd spoken just before her final flight. No answer came. Emma flipped on lights as she moved through the quiet house, noticing small changes that had occurred during her absence. New artwork on the walls, different throw pillows on the sofa, a collection of unfamiliar plants thriving in the kitchen window. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a camera, she found a note in Mason's handwriting. Welcome home. Meet me at the cottage when you're ready. No rush. Emma smiled, running her fingers over the familiar loops and curves of his penmanship. During her 6 weeks in Thailand and Vietnam, they had maintained their communication schedule with remarkable consistency. Morning and evening check-ins, shared documents full of cottage renovation plans, long emails when time differences made real-time conversation impossible. She debated whether to shower and change after 20 hours of travel, but anticipation won over practicality. Leaving her luggage in the entryway, Emma grabbed her car keys and headed back out into the crisp autumn evening. The drive to Lake. Monroe took nearly an hour, darkness having fully settled by the time she turned onto the cottage's gravel drive. What she saw made her gasp aloud. The cottage glowed with warm light from every window. The previously peeling paint was now a fresh, clean white, blue shutters restored to their original vibrancy. Solar-powered lanterns illuminated a newly constructed pathway from the parking area to the front steps. On the wraparound porch, subtle string lights created a magical, welcoming atmosphere. Emma sat in her car for a moment, overwhelmed by the transformation. When she and Mason had purchased the cottage, it had been a promise of future possibilities. Now it stood before her as a manifestation of that promise. Tangible proof that dreams discussed long distance could become reality. Mason appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the golden light behind him. Emma climbed out of her car, on legs shaky from both travel fatigue and emotion. "You did all this?" she asked as she approached the porch steps. Mason descended to meet her, pulling her into an embrace that felt simultaneously familiar and new. "Not alone. I had help. But yes, this is what I've been working on while you were changing the world through your lens." Emma buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in his scent, paint and pine and something uniquely Mason. "It's beautiful. Wait until you see inside," he whispered against her hair. Hand in hand, they climbed the porch steps. Before entering, Emma turned to look out at the lake, now visible only as a vast darkness where stars disappeared at the horizon. Tomorrow, she would see how the water looked from their restored cottage in daylight. Tonight, she would discover what Mason had created within these walls. The interior transformation was even more dramatic. The formerly cramped rooms flowed into one another now, walls removed to create an open-concept main floor. The avocado green kitchen had been replaced with simple white cabinets and butcher block countertops. The stone fireplace remained the focal point of the living room, now flanked by built-in bookshelves. "The upstairs is still a work in progress," Mason explained as he led her through the space. "But I wanted the main floor finished for your homecoming." Emma wandered from room to room, noticing how Mason had incorporated elements of their shared aesthetic: warm woods, natural textiles, spaces that prioritized the spectacular views. But she also discovered personal touches meant specifically for her. A reading nook beneath a window, a desk positioned to capture northern light, framed prints of her own photographs from past travels. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, emotion tightening her throat. Mason guided her to the sofa facing the fireplace, where flames already danced behind the grate. "You don't have to say anything. Just tell me about Thailand, about the children you photographed, about everything you've seen while we were apart." So she did. Words poured from her as Mason listened intently, asking questions, responding with genuine interest. She showed him preview images on her camera, described challenging shoots in remote villages, explained the narrative she was building about education access in rural communities. Hours passed in this exchange, the conversation flowing as naturally as the lake water against the shore outside. When Emma's words finally slowed, exhaustion catching up to her, Mason spoke again. "I have something to show you upstairs. One last surprise." He led her up the narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was lined with empty frames. "Waiting for your photographs," Mason explained, leading to what had once been the smallest bedroom at the back of the cottage. "Close your eyes," he instructed, echoing his words from her birthday night. Emma complied, hearing the door open before Mason guided her forward several steps. "Okay, look." She opened her eyes to find herself standing in a fully equipped darkroom. Not the digital workstation she primarily used these days, but a traditional darkroom with enlarger, processing trays, and specialized lighting, the kind of space she'd learned photography in but hadn't had access to for years. "I know most of your work is digital now," Mason said uncertainly when she remained silent. But you mentioned missing the process sometimes, the magic of watching an image appear in the developer. I thought maybe up here, away from deadlines. And assignments. Emma turned to face him, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. You remembered that conversation? From years ago? Mason nodded. I remember more than you think, Emma, even from when we weren't really talking. She moved into his arms then, the final walls around her heart crumbling. They had spent 6 months rebuilding their home, their cottage, their relationship, brick by careful brick. The dark room represented something beyond renovation. It was Mason truly seeing her, honoring not just who she was becoming, but who she had always been. Welcome home, he whispered against her hair. Emma pulled back slightly, looking into the eyes of the man she had nearly lost, the man she was still learning to find again. I am home, she said softly. Not because of this cottage or our house or any renovation, but because we found our way back to each other. Mason's smile held both joy and the shadow of their struggle. We still have work to do, he reminded. Her. I know. Emma looked around the dark room, then back to Mason. But now I believe we'll do that work together instead of drifting apart. Outside, moonlight silvered the lake's surface. Inside, 2 people who had nearly become strangers stood with fingers intertwined, surrounded by physical manifestations of promises kept and new beginnings. Emma thought about the locked door on her birthday 6 months ago, how she had stood, in the rain believing everything was ending when in fact, something new was just beginning. How sometimes being shut out was the first step toward finding your way in. Happy half-birthday, Mason whispered, reaching into his pocket to produce a small velvet box. What's this? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. Open it. Inside lay not jewelry as she had expected, but a simple key on a silver chain. Another house? She joked weakly, emotion threatening to overwhelm her again. Mason shook his head, taking the necklace and fastening it around her neck. It's the original key to our front door, the one I changed on your birthday. I had it made into a necklace to remind us both. No more locked doors between us, literally or figuratively. Emma closed her hand around the key, feeling its edges press against her palm. A tangible reminder of how close they had come to losing everything, and how deliberately they had rebuilt. I love you, she said, words that had become rare between them in the difficult months but now felt fresh and true again. I love you too, Mason replied. Welcome home. This time, Emma knew he wasn't just welcoming her back from Thailand. He was welcoming her back to their life together. A life they had both chosen to fight for when walking away would have been easier. Outside, the lake lapped gently against the shore, constant and rhythmic like the beating of 2 hearts finding their way back to the same tempo. Inside, in a room designed to capture moments in time, Emma and Mason stood at the beginning of their next chapter. Not a perfect ending, but a perfect continuation.